So in 1095, the entire medieval world was turned on its head as Pope Urban II called for the mobilisation of all lords and soldiers to fight a holy war in the Christian East as it was under attack by the enemies of God. It was the Byzantines who held the gateway city into Christian Europe of Constantinople who were under attack by the Seljuk Turks, and after a series of losses they sent pleas to the west for support, and the Pope heeded their call, saying that anyone who went on this armed pilgrimage would have instant admission into heaven and remission of all of their sins. The First Crusade, as it would come to be known, saw everyone from knights to peasants take up the call to defend Christendom, and whether the Pope intended the capture of Jerusalem as the end goal is conflicting based on which contemporary account you read, but it was the People's Crusade who set off first. Led by the charismatic Peter the Hermit, who amassed a cult following preaching the Pope's call to arms, and while the Pope's crusade was to set off in August 1096, Peter suffered from a case of premature crusadulation and set off in April with 40,000 crusaders in staggered waves who committed multiple war crimes along the way. However, the People's Crusade soon fizzled out just after Constantinople due to lack of clear leadership, as Peter the Hermit was no fighter, a lack of consistent supplies and numerous defeats to the Turks. However, a much larger army was on the way to fight the War of God. The Prince's Crusade was next to set off, numbering up to 100,000 men, led by some of the highest ranking nobles in all of the land who had connections to royalty, and they arrived in Constantinople swearing fealty to the Byzantine Empire that all lands taken from the Turks will be returned to him in return for some supplies. The Crusaders first took Nicosia before winning an important victory at Dorylaeum. However, now one of the Crusader leaders wanted to make his own territory in the Holy Land and set off towards Edessa, while the rest of the army now marched towards Antioch. However, now they didn't have enough men to fully surround the city. They did manage to take Antioch as they bribed one of the wall guards to let them up ladders one night and then opened the gates to the entire Crusader force. However, Antioch wasn't as well supplied as the Crusaders thought, as they had just tried to starve it out, and a 40,000 strong Turkish relief force was on the way to surround them, with Crusader morale now through the floor. The Crusaders had surrender terms rejected and now did the only thing they could, and like Theoden at Helm's Deep, they charged out and took the Turks head on, and although heavily outnumbered, they won an astonishing victory due to ill-disciplined Turks charging out of formation and then getting beaten off before fully retreating. Despite numerous disputes, lack of supplies and awful heat, a plague outbreak and even reports of cannibalism, it seems that God was on the side of the Crusaders at every turn, and they now marched onto Jerusalem with a force of roughly 12,000 men and laid siege to it and quickly captured it 3 years after they had set off. The First Crusade left a lasting legacy on Europe, as many now wanted to take up the cross to emulate what they had done here and even go one greater and rid the Holy Land of the Saracens completely. However, none would ever be as successful as what happened here. So one of the biggest disasters of the medieval world has to be the Fourth Crusade, where instead of attacking any Muslim bases in the Holy Land, they instead decided to sack Constantinople, causing irreparable damage to the Christian world. The fun began in 1201 when the Republic of Venice agreed to transport 33,000 crusaders to take the Egyptian city of Alexandria, which was also a Muslim stronghold, which would have been an easy target as it had struggled with famines in the past few years, and it would have opened up a new front to launch assaults into Jerusalem from the south. However, when the time came to depart, only around a third of the expected Crusaders showed up, and they could only cough up around 50,000 of the agreed 85,000 marks to the Venetians, and now this left them in a giant financial crisis as they had practically built the entire fleet from scratch, and now they needed to get the money from somewhere. They couldn't just abandon the crusade now for further financial ruin, so the Venetian Doge Enrico Dandolo, who was 94 and blind at this time, but still fit enough to lead a crusade, decided that on the way to the Holy Land they would sack the port of Zara to make up for the missing money, which was once owned by the Venetians, but was now owned by the King of Hungary and Croatia after it had rebelled. The Pope thought this is what the Venetians would do if they got their way, and threatened everyone on the crusade with excommunication. However, Dandolo didn't care despite protests, and sacked the city anyway, before camping there in the winter months to decide his next move, all while the Pope excommunicated them. However, this was lifted a few months later, with just a slap on the wrist saying, "Now go and attack your Muslim enemies, and don't do this again." However, when they set off, it wasn't for Alexandria, nor even Jerusalem, it was for Constantinople to help the recently deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II retake his throne from his older brother Alexius III, and in return the Crusaders would have their entire debts paid off, plus an additional 200,000 silver marks and 10,000 more troops to help them take Alexandria. The offer was too good to refuse, however many Crusaders saw it for what it was, a massive lie, and abandoned the journey and made their own way to the Holy Land, with Dandolo having to bribe many in order to follow him to Constantinople, where they laid siege to it in July 1203 before capturing a portion of the wall and then setting fire to much of the city. Alexios soon fled, and with the city taken they restored Isaac II to the throne, as well as crowning his son, who originally offered the Crusaders terms, co-emperor. However, the treasury didn't have enough money to cover the 200,000 it owed to the Crusaders, so they had to melt down the local population's religious icons, much to their annoyance. However, this still didn't even cover the costs. The population of Constantinople absolutely hated Alexios for bringing thousands of barbarians to their doorstep, and when Isaac II passed away a few months later, possibly from natural causes, they rallied around the new man, Alexios V, because they're so creative at naming people, who soon threw Alexios IV in a dungeon, with the Crusaders demanding his release and their payment on his terms. Alexios IV was strangled to death in a dungeon by Alexios V, who apparently even disemboweled him with a hook, and now the Crusaders wanted their remaining money off Alexios V, but he told them to fuck off out of all of his lands within a week, or he'd kill them all, and now war between them was inevitable. The first Crusader assault was repelled, with them believing this to be a setback by God, and although the Pope told them all to return home, his message was suppressed by the leaders, as the wind conditions now favoured the Venetian galleys to get close and assault the walls, where they soon took the city in the second assault, and Alexios V soon fled it. Over the next 3 days, the city was sacked and pillaged in the most horrific fashion, where the total value of their loot was around 900,000 silver marks, paying off their debts entirely, as the Christians formed new Crusader states from Christian territory, as well as the fragmentation of the Byzantine Empire. So during siege warfare, one such strategy used by attackers was to starve out the defenders to force them to surrender their position. However, during the siege of Acre in 1198 during the Third Crusade, there comes a fantastic story of how the defenders sneaked more supplies in. After being absolutely battered by Saladin's forces at the Battle of Hattin, the remnants of the Crusader force led by the King of Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, laid siege to the port city of Acre using all the remnants of the Crusader forces left in the Holy Land. Saladin's forces soon surrounded the besiegers, however more Crusaders were arriving from Europe, and after a bit of back and forth, the Crusader besiegers now had blocked any part of the city from the land, and also had control of the ports. One thing the Christians did know about Islam is that they wouldn't eat pork because they considered the pig an unclean animal, and Saladin used this to his advantage. Muslim sailors shaved their beards in a Crusader manner, wore Crusaders' clothes and flew the banners of the Crusaders, all while their supply ships carried grain, onions, cheese, lamb, and of course, visible pigs running around the top deck as they sailed towards the city of Acre. As they approached the city of Acre, this of course tricked the Crusader blockade, as no Muslim ships would be carrying pigs on board, and they got asked why one of their ships would be heading towards the city, and the captain of the disguised ship answered back, as if they were surprised, "Haven't you taken the place yet?" "No," said the Christians, so the disguised Muslim ship said they will head towards the troops on the beaches, but they better warn the ship behind them that was following them on the same wind of the situation at hand. And there was actually a Christian vessel following soon after, so patrol boats went to warn it off the resupply, and the Muslims slipped through the blockade and resupplied the city because their pig deception had actually worked. The siege did last a few more years though after the Great Pig Deception, until in 1191, King Richard the Lionheart forced the city into surrender. So while the Crusades were an absolute sausage fest, one woman who did defy gender roles was Margaret of Beverley, who took on the might of Saladin's forces in 1187 at the siege of Jerusalem with a cooking pot as her helmet. After absolutely massacring the Crusader forces at the Battle of Hattin, Saladin now set his sights on the ultimate prize of the city of Jerusalem. However, Big Marge was ready to show him what's what after having taken the cross in the mid-1180s for a pilgrimage. Margaret was born in Jerusalem 30 or 50 years prior after her English parents went on a pilgrimage, and now she returned with a group of pilgrims, although it's unknown whether she intended to take part in any combat. Nevertheless, she took an active role in the siege, improvising a cooking pot for a helmet, as well as carrying water to men on the front lines, as well as taking part in any fighting where necessary. Whether she actually wore the cooking pot is up for debate though, as the dire circumstances inside Jerusalem made it highly likely that household objects would be used for weapons and armour. But then there's the counter-argument of the pot, reflecting woman medieval warriors who are thought to be a strange old bunch, unfit for combat and relegated to supporting the men on the front lines. Margaret's account comes from her monk brother Thomas, whom she was reunited with after her crusading adventure, where she reportedly said, "Like a fierce virago, I tried to play the role of a man, a woman pretending to be a man, terrified, but I pretended not to be afraid." However, she was soon hit by the fragments from a projectile from a siege engine, and with Big Marge wounded, Saladin soon rolled in and took the city, ransoming all the inhabitants back to the Crusaders, with Big Marge paying her own ransom. Accompanied by a group of pilgrims, she set off north, where she was soon captured and enslaved by a group of Muslims before being released after an official from the city of Tyre paid her ransom. She soon made a solo trip north towards Antioch to pray to the tomb of St. Margaret of Antioch, but while she was there the city came under siege from Saladin's forces, but this time the Crusaders won and Margaret played an active role in looting the dead. She then went south towards Tripoli, where she was once again captured by Muslim forces. However, she wasn't enslaved this time, as she either spoke the words of St. Mary and was released, or they saw the goodies she had looted from Antioch and did not want to mess with such a powerful and feared woman. She then went to the city of Acre, arriving in 1191 after the arrival of the Third Crusading forces led by Richard the Lionheart and Philip II of France, before she headed back towards Europe, visiting Rome and Santiago de Compostela in Spain first, before being reunited with her brother Thomas in Froidmont in northern France. She was soon persuaded by her brother to leave her hectic lifestyle and live out the rest of her days as a nun, which she did, passing away sometime either in 1210 or 1214/1215, but her story is one of the most documented cases of a woman during the Crusades, and I'm not surprised, this pan is amazing.